Mr. Chairman. I want to thank Chairman Yarmouth and Ranking Member Womack for the opportunity to come before the distinguished Budget Committee. As you indicated, we have written testimony, and what I'd like to do is deviate from that because of, in both of your opening remarks, you covered a lot of the ground that I would go over. I would add, in fact, that while, and you're right to say that this is keeping our promise to American seniors is first and foremost. The Ways and Means Committee has already unanimously adopted the Secure Act that Mr. Womack alluded to, and legislation also that would require automatic enrollment for employees. Bipartisanly, Rich Neal is heading up leading legislation addressing multi-employer pension crisis that we face with a number of pieces of legislation. I would also add that we want to go through these things and address them in a bipartisan fashion. And we think we have legislation that is increasingly, because we haven't had hearings in 8 years, we think the legislation here is drawing critical masses of the required individuals. I mean, this is our responsibility at the end of the day. The last time that Congress truly looked at this program was 36 years ago. And when they did it bipartisanly with, at the time, a reluctant Republican president, but one who became a chief advocate. And Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan get a lot of credit for bringing people together, but I would point out also that the Republicans controlled the Senate at that time also, and Howard Baker was the United States Senator. What's at stake here? What's at stake here is the nation's leading insurance program and the nation's leading anti-poverty program. Without this program and the direction that we're headed in, by 2035, we would find ourselves in a situation where people who have earned $50,000 in income throughout their lives would face a 20% across the board cut and would be living below the poverty level. It's our responsibility. We're the actuaries. It's an insurance program. The public knows this because it says, they look at their pay stub and it says FICA. What does that mean? Federal Insurance Contribution Act. Whose contribution? Theirs. And approximately every one of us has approximately 100,000 more in districts, depending on how it is, people who are currently on Social Security. It's our responsibility to make sure that the program is actuarially sound. I don't know how any member can go back to their district, look people in the eyes, including your mothers, your sisters, your aunts, your uncles, and say, with our responsibility, when on our watch, knowing everything that we do and knowing, as both the chairman and ranking member have outlined, what our responsibility is, that we chose not to act. This has also become the civil rights issue of the day. It's also become a woman's issue of the day and an economic development issue of the day. I talk about that in my testimony, but I just want to briefly underscore how we see the disadvantages that take place for women of color, for black men who find themselves with mortality rates and the inability to collect on monies that they've put forward into this program, and why across the board cuts or hikes by raising the age of individuals. It just turned 66. It's hiked. It will go up to 67. Another hike beyond that for every year that we add is a 7% cut. And with so many individuals depending upon Social Security, it's paramount that this Congress, faced with our responsibility, takes the action that it needs. We have legislation that's out there. We have introduced it with more than 200 co-sponsors. What we need is now the bipartisan support. It will pass the House of Representatives. There's no question about that. And I want to commend the President of the United States for first taking a bold stand in a presidential debate when it really mattered, in saying this isn't an entitlement, this is an earned benefit. Now it's time for us to all come together and work collaboratively so that we save this program and enhance it the way it should be. Happy to take your questions.
I don't. Any member want to ask Chairman Larson a question? Great. We thank the chairman for his testimony and his insights, and we appreciate your being here today.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you
Chairman.
very much.
You didn't even give me a chance to go into my Starbucks, and these are my stump speech props that I have, but I would point out and like to submit for the record the Chief Actuary of Social Security. We have the only bill that has been deemed by the actuary to be sufficiently solvent. That meets the requirement by law that is our responsibility to sustain the program beyond 75 years.
All right. Ranking member has a question.
Mr. Chairman,
Oh.
just a point of clarity. You asked if anybody wanted to ask any questions. Was in addition to our 5 minutes you're going to give us later?
Just one question.
Well, one question is that just for a point of clarity for the record, the 21% that we're going to see in 2035 affects all people, not just, you had mentioned it was a civil rights issue and a woman's issue, but it's all people's issues.
It is all people's issues, the 20% across the board. But currently, under current law, you have 5 million Americans. There's 62 million Americans who are on Social Security currently, 5 million of whom are living below the poverty level. Part of what we hope to do is to make sure that we both create a new floor for Social Security so that especially women who, because they are the primary caregivers, and today with 74% of them in the workforce, find themselves because they were earning 80 cents for every dollar their male counterparts were, and because they spent less time because they were the caregivers, find themselves in poverty. In fact, close to 3 million women across this country who have paid in all their quarters, worked all their lives, are living in poverty in the wealthiest nation in the world. And this is an actuarial problem that is easily resolved by Congress. I ask any member of this body, have any of your insurance premiums gone up since 1983? You have the responsibility. If you were a business, if you were an insurance company, I happen to be from an insurance capital of the nation and had an insurance business as well. You know, you would make those adjustments and raise those costs. Had they indexed it the way they should have in 1983, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. And Social Security has never missed a payment. But thank you for that question. It's a great point because this will impact all individuals. But when you look currently how this disproportionately impacts women and men of color because of their particular financial situation, it's time for us to act.
Thank you for the clarity.
Thank you. Gentleman from California, Mr. Peters, has a question. Oh, did you have one?
I think you're fishing for me to ask you about your Starbucks reference, Mr. Chairman, so I was going to just give you the chance to do that.
Well, everybody always asks, well, how are you going to pay for this? Well, we pay for it by making sure that we do what they should have done in 1983. We have incremental funding. We increase it approximately by 1.2%, the contribution. And as you know, the contribution is made by the employee and the employer. The employer gets to write it off as taxes. The employee not only gets a pension benefit, but also, and we don't discuss this enough, a disability payment, spousal and dependent coverage. There is no place in the public market as a former insurance agent that you can go and buy this. It's the full faith and credit of the United States government. We also lift the cap on people over $400,000, and that's where the Starbucks comes in. At every seniors center I go to, I say, how much is this Starbucks cost? And they all will say, is it a latte? And I go, yes. They go, $4.50. They go, that's correct. Or under our plan, if you're making $50,000 a year, this is 9 weeks of Social Security payments. And even if you're that poor person at $400,000, it will cost you more to buy a latte than it will to fix Social Security. We can do this. Had they incrementally phased this in and indexed it back in 1983, we wouldn't be having this discussion. They didn't. We're the stewards of this program. It's our responsibility to do this, and we can fix a major problem. Again, let me credit the president for sticking his neck out on this one as well.
Ranking member has a question.
You know, one of the great frustrations I have as a member of Congress is the fact that the varsity sport of Congress is a game called kicking the can down the road.
Exactly.
And we're really good at it. I mean, we don't have a rival in this notion that when confronted with a problem like we have with Social Security, or even more urgent, in my view, is the problem with the Hospital Insurance Trust Fund, right, which is about 10 years ahead of Social Security in terms of insolvency. That it seems as though we do not decide to take effective action until we're on the cliff. And need I remind anybody of the cliffhanger that we had in 2012 and 13 on the Bush era tax cuts, that we waited until the very last minute, in fact, beyond the last minute. But I digress. I think the people of America, while there's anecdotal evidence out there that they understand that we have a problem, but the problem is not tomorrow. The problem is 2035. And it seems as though Congress is okay with deciding we're going to deal with this when it becomes a real matter of urgency, like 2033 or 2034. And it seems to me that whenever you delay the eventual that long, that your options become fewer and further between, and they become much more draconian in their nature. So I don't know if I've got so much of a question as just a comment along those themes that I'll throw back at you, Congressman Larson, for any response you'd care to make.
Well, I couldn't agree more with you. And also, I would point out, and I do so in my testimony, how it's also said, well, this problem, is, we're going to be okay until 2035. And also that, well, this is just a shifting from one generation to another. No, it's not. In fact, millennials are going to need Social Security more than baby boomers will need Social Security. It's long overdue for boomers and millennials to unite and talk about something that's within our grasp and something that we can solve, and do so pragmatically, in a common sense manner, and address it in a business-like manner, the same way any actuarial would do that. Now, the unique feature here is that every single thing that we call for in these enhancements has been already, by the independent actuary, said not only is it paid for, but it is sustainable beyond 75 years. Wouldn't it be great on our watch to take this off Congress's plate and to go home and be able to look everyone in the eye and say, not only did we fix this, we fixed it for, by law as we're required, beyond 75 years, and we enhanced it. We won't allow for anyone who's paid their quarters in to retire into poverty. We won't see women of color have the, to find themselves impoverished, even though they've worked all their lives and paid in their quarters. And so it just seems to me that there's ample opportunity. And again, it took President Reagan and Tip O'Neill coming together. And most people forget that Howard Baker was the Senate chairman at that time. So it's the identical situation that we are confronted with here today. Tip had a few more Democrats at that time than we do today, but I think the situation warrants, especially with the president being predisposed to do this and have talked and written in his book about this as being an earned benefit. But thank you.
Thank you. The gentleman from Texas, Mr. Flores, has a question.
Thank you, Chairman Yarmouth and Republican Leader Womack for holding today's hearing. Chairman Larson, I appreciate you being here. Mr. Womack talked about the blood sport of kicking the sport of kicking the can down the road that Congress has gotten pretty good at. The other thing that we've gotten really good at is the blood sport of condemning each other when either side tries to touch the third rail of policy in this town, and Social Security is certainly one of those. And I remember back in 2011 when I was a freshman member of the Budget Committee, we put up a plan to try to save Medicare for all generations. And within 36 hours, there was an ad of somebody pushed a wheelchair that threw Granny over the cliff, and that somebody was that looked like a lot like Paul Ryan, who was then the budget chair. So I agree with you. We're going to have to hold hands and do this in a bipartisan manner. There's some things about your bill I like. There's some things about your bill that I think could benefit from some bipartisan support. And so I hope that that's something that we can do moving forward. As we're all aware, the 2019 Social Security Trustees Report offered a grim outlook on the current path. Social Security will run deficits of nearly $1.8 trillion in the next 10 years, and benefits will face 20% reductions by 2035. That means today's 51-year-olds will face cuts when they reach retirement age, and today's newest retirees will face cuts when they turn 78. So it's important to note that the average new retiree lives to age 85. And so we don't do anything, as you were pretty eloquent in saying, Social Security is going to become solvent, and everyday Americans are going to hurt. So again, we've got to grab hands and work on this, but it's got to be bipartisan. So I'm hopeful that you're willing to do that. I do have to add some additional context to some of the things that the chairman said in his opening statements. One, wage growth is not flat or stagnant now. The last quarter's wage growth was up 3.2%, and there were some comments about income inequality. The bottom 10%, income in the bottom 10% of Americans in the last quarter grew by 6.6%, over double of what the average population did. So the tax cuts, the economic reforms that we proposed are truly lifting all boats and reducing the income inequality that exploded over the last several years before that. So with that, I yield back the balance of my time. Thank you.
Well, I would just add that, thank you for the comments. I'd add also that Tom Reed has been outstanding. And I think, let's be blunt about it, I think what people don't like about the program is how we pay for it. And but at the end of the day, we're faced with two options. Either you raise the age, which again, let's be honest about it, that's a cut in benefits to people that we're finding, and both the Republican leader and the chairman eloquently stated what the deal is here in terms of these people and what they'll receive. And for them to be looking at, for many of them, for almost 90% of people who haven't recovered from the 2008 recession, then to find themselves in a situation where we're either going to hike the age where they get another cut in the benefit that, for whatever the reason, their inability to save, their companies no longer, there's no such thing anymore as defined benefit plans. We all know that, and we should be doing everything that we could to encourage all three legs of the stool, but our primary responsibility is Social Security. And for the millennials especially, it's not just the wage differential or wage stagnation, but it's also enormous student loan debt, the gig economy and everything that has, the lack of high-paying labor jobs, the fact that there'll be a generation that will probably earn less than their parents earned and are going to rely more on Social Security. And primarily, again, because of the opioid epidemic, et cetera, actually, the death rate tables have dropped and have come down. And so, but even as people are living longer, all the more reason that actuarially, where we are responsible, that we make the program solvent and that it's able to accomplish its goals. But Tom, Mark Meadows. I mean, you would think that it would be strange bedfellows, Mark Meadows and myself, but he talks about his mom and everything that she needed in order to make this program secure. Tom Price, who lost their dads and were raised on Social Security. Rich Neal, the chairman of the committee, lost his mother and father. And so I think everybody understands the importance and significance. The issue is, can we look in the mirror and say, hey, listen, if we raise the age and that's a 7% cut to somebody, how do they handle it? This is the reality of what they'll receive. That's would be my point.
All right, once again, thank you, Chairman Larson. You can take your Starbucks cup and appreciate your
Thank you, Mr.
testimony once again. Absolutely.